During the 16th century, the French began to develop their own Renaissance style. Some of the style characteristics are similar to the Italian Renaissance, but there is less emphasis on rules and correct proportion, and there is more focus on inventiveness and surface richness. I chose to open this presentation with the parade armor of King Henry II. This is formed out of hot steel and ornamented with gold and silver. It is on display at the Met, which is the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it is a perfect example of the surface richness that we would see in some of the French Renaissance designs. The French invasions of Italy helped to bring some of the Italian Renaissance style to France. And as they bring these styles back, they are very eager to recreate this design style in their homes and their lives. But we do have this blending of styles that are already in France. Remember that the Gothic style started in France, so we see that that is still a part of this early French Renaissance style. And then we also have this mannerism style. And mannerism style could best be described as an exaggerated or over-realistic approach to design. So when we look at some imagery of humans or animals, the characteristics are overemphasized or exaggerated. Moving forward throughout the early Renaissance and beyond, the French start to develop their own classical French Renaissance style. And we will look to study some of those style characteristics to help us to identify the difference between Italian Renaissance, French Renaissance, and Spanish Renaissance. Toward the end of the French Renaissance, we see this design style that is really meant to promote the absolute monarchy. So it's almost, design and architecture are almost used as propaganda to promote the luxurious side of nobility and monarchy. And this really sets the stage for some of the future styles that we'll study, starting with Louis XIV, Louis XV, and Louis XVI in the Palace of Versailles. The image on the right is showing an interior from the early French Renaissance, and it is showing the focal point of most French Renaissance interiors, which is the fireplace. Over the fireplace is the symbol, the salamander with the crown, and this is a symbol for King Francois I. We will study the different symbols associated with different monarchies through the French Renaissance and beyond. We also see in this interior image this surface ornamentation and how that becomes a focal point of the fireplace, but also of the ceiling. Let's begin with the historical background of the French Renaissance style. In the 15th century, France becomes a united kingdom. King Charles returns victorious from Italy in 1495, and he brings the Renaissance style to France. So he brings many Italian craftsmen back to France to help create the Italian Renaissance style in France. King Francois I is known for art, culture, and the building of the chateau. So he really promotes this French Renaissance style, and he also promotes art and learning. Then France's King Henry II marries Catherine de' Medici. And remember that she is part of the Medici family, which is a very powerful family in Florence. And remember that the Italian Renaissance started in Florence, so there's another connection to the Italian Renaissance style. He also has a mistress, Diane de Poitiers, and we'll talk about her later, and how she became an important part of creating the French Renaissance style. But during his time, there's this period of turmoil as Protestants and Catholics fight for power. And then in 1598, King Henry IV creates the Edict of Nantes, and this allowed religious freedom for all, so you were free to practice Catholicism and a Protestant religion. So the Edict of Nantes helped to restore peace in France. It also helped to develop this French arts and crafts style. Many people from around Europe, many artists from around Europe started to flood into France because they were able to practice their religion freely. So France becomes the center for the most talented artists in the world. Now, you know the Louvre as a very famous museum in the center of Paris. At this time, the Louvre was actually set up as apartments for many of these artists, and they also had free workshops for the artists that were practicing in France to develop some of these French decorative arts and crafts. Another thing that's happening during this time is that at this point we see Henry IV start to use the power of art to really exalt the monarchy. So again, remember it's that using architecture, art, design, and decorative arts to as propaganda to promote the nobility and the monarchy. The French also start to acquire tapestries and manufacture tapestries at the Gobelins. So this becomes an important part of that French Renaissance style. They also encourage new industries. So they actually smuggle a silkworm out of China, and they start to analyze how silk is produced, and then they start to understand the development of the silk making process and create luxurious fabrics using silk. Starting off in the early French Renaissance style, we see this combination of many different styles. So we see that strong Gothic heritage mixed with ancient Roman design, Italian Renaissance, and then there's also a few Flemish characteristics. Because the Gothic style originated in France, it's a very rich design source, and it's really hard for them to overcome that style. But classical language and knowledge really starts to increase because of all the Italian artists coming in from France. They start to study many treatises and prints to help understand especially ancient Roman design. And then they try to modify that ancient Roman design into this French national style. So when we look at the image here, we see the barrel vault ceiling, which of course is an ancient Roman design. We also see the columns around the staircase. But there are a few elements of this that make this French Renaissance. Notice the coffered ceiling and notice the different motifs and decorative elements within each coffered part of the ceiling. Also notice the heavy use of stone and then tapestries on the wall. So this is kind of starting off this first French Renaissance, early French Renaissance style. So when we look at overall French Renaissance motifs, we see some from Roman design and Gothic design. For example, we'll see linen fold paneling, which is from the Gothic design, but then we see columns, pediments, and arches, which are part of that classical design that we saw in Greece and Rome. But we do have some that are very specific to the French Renaissance. So we will see right here we have initials. So that would be an F for King Francois I. We have the fleur-de-lis. The fleur-de-lis is the symbol of the French monarchy. And then remember I said that each king will find a symbol that represents them. And so we have the salamander, the crowned salamander on the left, which is the symbol for King Francois I. And then on the right we have the symbol for Louis XII, which is a porcupine. So the designs that we're going to study are going to be really showing this evolution of the French Renaissance style. Some blending of the Gothic design, but more what we're going to focus on more is the combination of all of the designs to create this uniquely French design. Remember that there is this focus on the classical design as far as the classical ordering system. So there is a focus on regularity, order, and symmetry. Those are all very important parts of the French Renaissance style. But there's also this focus on surface ornamentation and inventiveness. So think back to an Italian Renaissance building. It had a very plain facade. There was not much ornamentation around the windows. And let's look at the building on the right, which is the Louvre Square Court area. And we see definitely that there is symmetry in this building and ordering is very important. But we also see all over surface ornamentation. We also see more varying design styles around the windows also. So notice on the first floor we have the Roman arch. On the second floor we have the pediment over the window. And then on the third floor we have this unique ornamentation and carving. And then we have this central focus of the entire building that is also heavily carved with some classical ornamentation. So I would say that the French Renaissance architectural style is much more lively. It's very vertical and picturesque than the Italian Renaissance style. We also have some climate differences that help to distinguish the Italian Renaissance from the French Renaissance style. So remember that the Italian Renaissance has very flat roofs. When we look at the French Renaissance style, we're going to have steeply pitched roofs because the climate is much different in France. We're also going to have larger windows and prominent chimneys because those chimneys are going to help keep the buildings warm during the cold winters in France. An important building that we'll study in the French Renaissance is the chateau, and this is the earliest form of French Renaissance architecture. It was built on a hill with commanding views of river valleys, but it was originally designed as a defense mechanism so that they could see invaders coming from high up on the hill. And this is quite different than what you would see in Italian Renaissance, because usually the main Italian Renaissance buildings like the Palazzo would be in the center of the city. So these are very much out in the wilderness, out in the country. So the map on the left is showing the Loire River Valley, which is very well known for all of the chateaux that were built during the French Renaissance time period and beyond. As we begin to study the French styles, just remember that we will often have a king or a queen or a mistress that help to build this style. And so that will be part of your education in recognizing a style and knowing the monarch that was related to that style. Francois I is connected to the early Renaissance, and remember that he promoted art and architecture. So his court became an intellectual center for many of the arts, and so arts really began to flourish during this time. He also had a strong connection to Leonardo da Vinci, and he promoted much of his inventive work. He is also very well known for building many of the chateaux in France. And one way that we can connect design styles to a monarch, and as you're looking at the interior, you will notice their motif becoming part of the interior, part of the architecture. And so Francois I is again associated with that salamander motif. So if you ever get the chance to travel throughout France, and especially in the chateau region, when you go to the different chateaus, look for those motifs and you'll know what French monarch they're associated with. Chambord is probably one of the most well-known French chateaux. In the design, it is very symmetrical. So when we look at the overall design of the building, we see the symmetry. It's even on both sides. But it also has this very picturesque view. There are also horizontal string courses, and those string courses help to separate the different floors. It also helps to break up some of the verticality in the design. So the string course is this horizontal band that runs through and separating these different floors. There's also conical roofs and windows stacked with smooth stone surfaces. So the overall design is very picturesque. It's very romantic in style, but the facade of the building is a very smooth stone. Another part of this course is understanding design from a site planning view. So remember that the chateaux are built up on a hillside overlooking a river valley, and that's an important part of their design. Here we're seeing the symmetrical elements of the Chateau Chambord in a floor plan view. And so this chateau was developed by Francois I to reflect the grandeur of his court. There are over 440 rooms, 80 staircases, and 365 fireplaces. The original design was inspired by the Italian Renaissance, but we can see that it is quite different than the Italian Renaissance because of the roof lines and the abundance of chimneys on the roof lines. We have large rectangular and arched windows throughout the chateau, and it almost has a castle-like plan. And what I mean by that is it's almost fortified with walls that are enclosing the entire space. It also has the corner towers that help to fortify the space. And you can almost think of those corner towers as lookouts throughout the valley. It also was made out of tufa stone, which was a type of limestone material. And so as the building, as you look at the facade of the building, that stone has really aged beautifully throughout the years. Now at this time, I like for you to pause the recorded lecture and watch a short video on Chateau Chambord. And this is an important video. There will be questions on the exam associated with this video. So here's a close-up view of a few of the chimneys that we would see in the Chateau Chambord. And you can see that it creates this very picturesque roof line. It also, you have to remember there's 365 fireplaces, so all of these fireplaces had to be vented, and so that's why we see this very heavy design on the roof line of the chateau. On the right, we're seeing a turret over the main staircase in the chateau. A turret is a small tower that will project vertically from a wall or a ceiling. This is an image and a sketch of the great staircase in the Chateau Chambord. The staircase is in the center of the chateau, so this was an area in the previous slide where there was a turret at the top. Many believe that the interior staircase was possibly designed by Leonardo da Vinci in the shape of a double helix. From the drawing on the right, you can see that it is a double staircase, so it is possible to walk around each floor and pass from one set of steps to the other. Here's another view of the great staircase. You can see how it is lit from all sides. The glass was actually inserted in at a later date. But when we look at this coffered ceiling, you can see the salamander motif, and you can also see the F for Francois I. And here is another close-up view of the coffered ceiling and the motifs. Another well-known chateau associated with Francois I is the Chateau de Blois. And this is showing another very exquisite circular staircase, and you can see how it is open to the outside. And along the staircase railings, we see the Francois I salamander motif. So that is going to end our lecture on the French Renaissance overview and architecture. The next lecture will focus on interiors, furniture, and decorative arts.